All right, everybody, welcome back to the Identity Jedi Podcast show. Your man is going solo today, and my co-host is off in a far, far away place. No, he is off doing some things from work, so he can't really get great access to internet where he's at, and he's also like 50 hours ahead or something like that. I don't know. I don't do good with time zones, people, but so he was like, you know what, we're gonna rock this solo. But he's, we got to feel bad for him. And like, listen, when you guys hear this, please reach out to him, give him shit for this, because he's about to miss out on probably one of the funnest conversations that we have had on this podcast so far. There's no disrespect to any of our guests. We've had some great conversations at the time, but like, I'm excited about this one. I'm gonna have some fun. I've been following this gentleman for a while now, the last year, watching some of the things he's been doing and saying on LinkedIn, and also cheering on his podcast, the Identity Navigator. So you can check that out on all streaming platforms. You can be sure to check that out. So without further ado, let's welcome to the Identity Jedi Podcast. I am not, because I didn't do this. I should have did this before. I should have asked how to pronounce his last name, and I didn't. So I'm not going to even try and butcher it. But I'm going to say his first name, and I'm going to tell you how to pronounce his last name. But welcome, host of the Identity Navigator Podcast, Rohit. Welcome, man.
Well, that was some intro. Thank you, David. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing today?
I am very well, very excited about this podcast.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to have you on too. So as we get started, man, just, let everybody know, introduce yourself, give everybody the correct pronunciation of your last name, because I wasn't going to try and butcher it and do you any kind of disrespect by doing it. And I can learn how to pronounce it as well.
No disrespect. I don't think there is anyone who has ever pronounced my name correctly. So I absolutely am. I take it for granted now. But my name is Rohit Agnihorti, and I have been in the identity space for a little over 15 years now. So just living the dream here.
Yeah. Listen, living the dream, man. It is that in a nutshell. Like that, if people ask me what's it like working in identity, I was like, man, it's living the dream. Like, especially like if you love solving complex problems, like what better industry could you be in? Because we've got technical problems and you have the business problems you have to apply to that, and it's always fun. Yeah, so I get it, living the dream. How did you get started in identity? I love hearing about people's origin story, if you will. So
Yeah,
how did you
no,
get started?
absolutely. So once I graduated out of college, I got placed in a multinational company, and I was working on a lot of content management. There is a tool called as Documentum. I was writing a lot of indexing softwares and algorithms. Was interesting for a while, and then it got really, really boring. And then I thought, nope, not for me. Let me see what's out there. I'm young, or I was young at that time. So I I looked outside. I saw a US based startup hiring for security engineers, and I didn't know what it was at that time. I applied, got in, and that was it. So that startup was actually very, very uh, that had a bunch of people who were very, very smart, who used to tell me everything about what's there in HTTP packet, and did teach me a lot of stuff about how does computers essentially work. Uh, that startup got sold a few times, and finally it got sold to KPMG, one of the big four auditing firms.
Yeah.
And then I was with KPMG, and then a couple of years before that, I felt like I've done enough consulting in my life. I've done a few product development as well. Let me see what's on the other side. So I joined a insurance company or a financial tech company, and I have been here leading the identity and access management team ever since.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, it's I like I always say this. I love hearing people's origin stories and identity, because it's still a very young industry, right? I think probably within the last 10 or 15 years, or more like 15 years, like we really called it an industry. It was just IT. Then it was this thing in cybersecurity, right? So we find a lot of people who are just found their way into it, which is great, because you have all these diverse, in every sense of the word, people in this industry, because they come from all these different backgrounds, because there was no path to get into this. So I always find it interesting to hear their origin stories. So we had talked about a little bit in our pre-meeting about like the difference between being on like the consultant side, right, and then actually being like on the actual customer side, actually delivering and operating it. And I've always found that fascinating as well. So I wanted to kind of get your take on that, right? Having seen like the different sides of it, and now kind of in the more operator mode of it, of having to get these programs out and getting them running. Like, talk to me about some of the some of the challenges that you see, some of the things that you're surprised by, like kind of being in the chair now, like, oh wow, when I was on the other side, like I wasn't expecting this, or you're like, no, this is exactly what I thought it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And great question, by the way. So, there were a couple of reasons for why I switched to industry, but Mr. Steve Jobs had a big role to play in it. Not that he knew me or I knew him, but, but looking at all of his videos on YouTube for inspiration, and maybe while eating or having dinner, just looking at his videos, some of the things that he said really resonated with me, in terms of you can go in and go get out, provide some recommendations, but unless you're vested in the outcome of the strategy that you are proposing, are you really accountable for it? Like, does it really matter? Right? So while I was consulting, I started feeling more and more of, I could really propose anything, and does it really matter?
Mm,
Right? What is the outcome of my strategy? Let's say I was proposing to get rid of Active Directory and going on Azure Active Directory. I did not know what the result of it was, because it is like a 5-year initiative, if not more.
right,
So
right.
I wasn't scratching that itch of making myself accountable for the decisions that I was taking. At some point it felt like I was working in two dimension, and once I switched to industry, suddenly my two dimension become three dimensional, because now I was not just worried about putting a solution out there, but also ensuring that I'm implementing it in the right way, but most importantly being held accountable for the decisions that I'm taking. So that was definitely a big shift. I absolutely love being in the industry. Consulting was very nice and kind to me, but I can really deep dive into stuff here. Uh, I can really focus on being accountable and really building a team as well. Because another thing was, while at consulting, everybody was very self motivated. I did not have to do a lot of people leadership, because even though I had a few reportees, everybody was so self motivated. Everybody was trying to move up. There was this saying of move up or move out. So
Mm,
there wasn't a ton of aspect of people management. But now in the industry, culture is something that I'm really passionate about, how the culture of my team should be, and how we should behave in an everyday setting. How should we remove or optimize how we work as a team? So I absolutely love that aspect of it. Most of my thinking is influenced by the Netflix culture document. So shout out for that document. If you haven't read it, please go ahead and read it. uh, One of the things that it says is don't be a jerk, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So go ahead and read it. But managing the team, managing the people, is another fascinating aspect of my job right now.
yeah, that's awesome, man. And listen, we we share a passion in that, and that one of the things that I enjoy, probably more so than diving in with strategy and identity is the privilege to be a people leader, which I tell people it's absolutely a privilege, right? And I think that's where I've learned the most in my life and in my career. That's helped me the most is in helping somebody else find their success, right? Find out like what's important to them, and how how can I be a helpmate and fostering that success, and helping them, not necessarily is guiding them on their path in some aspect, but really more so just kind of being along for the ride. It's like, okay, well, you want to go this way. Okay, great. Now it's my job to create, help create a path for you. I can't remove all the obstacles out of your way, but help you to develop the skills over those obstacles, and get to where you want to go. So it is definitely one of the things that I really do. Like I said, I really enjoy that. So I'm glad that, just to hear the way you talk about it, that you're getting a chance to do that, um, and grow that part of yourself, but also be able to connect with your team, and build that. Staying in that, on that side of like just kind of leadership, and then you know running the operations now of identity. What would you say your take on what are the skills needed, right? When you look at that and say, okay, hey, as a consultant, you come in and said, okay, here's a strategy, you go forward, do these things, whatever, and it's really focused on like what you need to do from an identity perspective. But now being in that chair, right? Like there's this people aspect to it, there's a leadership aspect to it. Talk to me a little bit about like what does the position like really require? Like how much of your job is 70% people management, 30% identity? Like where's that mix kind of falling for you right now?
Yes, so I'm trying to redefine the responsibilities of my job, to be honest, David, because every time I looked up, with all due respect to my previous bosses, they were all great. I always felt like I could do it better. So now it's my chance to prove myself right.
There you
So
go.
uh, I've worked under some great leaders, and I picked, you know, bits and pieces of how they manage, and that is how I like to manage. But at the end of the day, while I was an engineer, I was cynical by nature, right? Like, oh, this is not working out because of this reason, or this is working
Mm,
on my
yeah.
laptop, right? As a people managers, I cannot do it. So, first of all, I had to change that mindset that, I don't have to be overly optimistic, right? But I need to be optimistic in front of my team. So that was a learning curve for me, but I do apply first principle thinking in everything that I do, and I request all of you to do the same. We just need to ask the questions, right? So many times as people leaders, we feel like we will come across as stupid or look dumb if we ask the questions, but I've realized most of the folks on the call have the same questions. What the heck is going on? Why are we even in this call? And we just need to voice those things. So don't I've made it sure that I don't fear or am in the domain of, I don't work out of fear of failure. Even if it makes me look stupid, so be it, right? I look at the bigger picture of why am I here. So it has been a ton of things, because while I was a consultant or an engineer, I was sitting alongside some of the smartest folks that there are. So my knowledge was in getting enhanced just by sitting next to them day in and day out. Not so much in the people leadership space, right? I have to make a conscious effort of going in and learning those technologies that my team does as well, or my team works on. Also, I think people leadership has been misunderstood so many times. Like,
Mm,
in so many cases that I've seen, people leaders have different expectations from their team that they have on themselves. Now, I don't want to anger folks, but you need to have the same level of expectations from everybody, right? So you cannot be a great manager if you were a truly shitty engineer. Pardon my French, right? You could have been a mediocre engineer and a great manager, but if you used to write a really shitty code, yeah, maybe software engineering leadership is not for you. So I make sure that I don't act like an overlord. I am humble. I'm grounded. I spend extra time on enhancing my skills, and uh, this myth of, I am this type of leader or that type of leader, that is not true. You have to be the type of leader that that individual wants you to be. So there could be a very accomplished individual, and they might not need any hand holding from you, and they would thrive under autonomy. There could be somebody very new, and they would need a lot of micromanagement, because they are learning the ropes. They would like to you
yeah.
call it micromanagement, some people might call it, really actively taking or participating in their career journey. So it is like adopting my leadership style to everybody, and just making sure that I'm driven by way of I want to achieve something rather than I want to prevent failures.
Yeah. Man, you just yeah, you just dropped some wisdom right there, man. That is I learned that very early on about leadership, but for me, like I'm fanatical about it. Like by the time I was 28, I had read, I'm about to go Cat Williams on you. But I had read, close to 20 or 30 books around leadership. Like
Mhm.
it was something that, I love to read regardless. But like leadership was something that always fascinated me. And, that aspect of, you're right. You can't just be one type of leader. Like to be a really good leader, like, yes, you have your strengths as a leader, and that's fine. But when you truly get into it and you have to lead other people, you have to be the type of leader that that person needs you to be, right? And that in order to, number one, get the best out of them, but really to serve them in the best way that you can, because that's what you're there to do as a leader. And then by doing that, you get the goal that all of you are going after. And I think part of where people struggle with going into leadership is that they focus on what's in it for them,
Mhm.
right? What do I get out of this? What's my bonuses? What's this? What's that? Or whatever. And while yes, there could be some incentives and things that you can go for, I just feel that as a leader that can't be your driving force. Your first question has to be, what does my team need? Right? What do they need? Okay, they need this. And I love the examples you gave. This person they're a go-getter. They need autonomy. I need to create an environment that gives them the freedom to they feel like, hey, I can go do what I need to go do to be successful. No problem. You got it. But this other person, like if I give them that same environment, they'll struggle because they don't know, they're new, they're learning, they want to ask questions, they need somebody to, handhold, walk them through, answer questions, be that really hands-on coach and mentor for them early on to where they find out where they need to go. And so, you know, depending on the size of your team, like you could have 5 people, 10 people, and now it's like you may have to lead 10 different ways in a single day, right? And some people will say, well, no, that's why you structure your team to be this, whatever. Hey, whatever, go what works for you, right? But the point is, you do have to be open to and understanding, like what does my team need? What's the best way to lead this person to serve that person? And that's huge, man. So there you go. Listen, people, you tuned in for Identity, and you got a leadership podcast. But you look by now, you guys, if you're listening, like this can go anywhere. We are not singular beings, right? I think we lose that sometimes. In this iteration of life, the generation that we're in, we just think that, well, you're this. You can only talk about this. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, human beings are capable of doing, like, we're humans. We're capable of doing so many different things and talking about so many different things. But I love that, man. That's awesome. So I think it's a perfect segue. Let's hop into your the announcement you made. I think it was, I'm probably gonna butcher it. Was it Friday? Or was it today?
No, I think it was yesterday or over the weekend sometime.
Over the weekend? Okay. Yeah. So, but I saw this link to post and I immediately got excited. And I was like, man, I can't. I was like, man, we got the podcast on Monday. I get to ask him about it. But you talked about, this Identity Navigator, a cohort of people coming in and learning, an interactive group and learning different things about identity. So talk to me a little bit about, what that is, and then tell the audience, like, what Identity Navigator is, and tell us a little bit about, what drove you to kind of come up with this and gave you the inspiration to launch this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Identity Navigator is a bi-weekly podcast that I release. Still starting out. I'm just shy of 10 episodes right now. So I deep dive into one of the technical topics and what are the gotchas. So you could hear about it while you are at the gym, you are running, you are trying to sleep, or whatever you are driving. But I just deep dive into a topic, something like a role-based access control, or how to effectively lead a team, or certifications for that matter. So check out that podcast if you haven't. I hope you like it. Then about this cohort. So I have been lucky in my life to work across multiple identity and access management domains. And another thing is that I have been lucky enough or fortunate enough to have always worked in identity and access management. So then I realized something, that there are folks who have been working in, let's say, identity governance space for 15 years, or directory services or single sign-on space for 15 years, and they do not have that breadth of knowledge that would really take them to the next level. How do you start leading an identity team? How do you start becoming a true SME in the identity space? Is by working across the identity domain. And that is the beauty of our space, right? If you are an excellent software engineer, you can probably write scripts. If you probably do not have that knack, you can work on configurations. Uh, if you do not like that work, you can possibly work in operations. So identity is such a beautiful space that irrespective of your aptitude, you will find a job in identity domain. Another thing that fascinated me was a lot of our managers and people leaders come from spaces like either non-technical background, or they come from the infrastructure background or software engineering background, and it's really, really hard for them to lead a team which is very, very identity focused. So even they do have best of intentions in mind, they do not have an outlet to learn about identity. Most of the courses that I saw out there were very focused on sale point training and privileged access management, CyberArk training, and whatnot. So I was actually talking to one of my friend. I'll probably not take his name, and he was really struggling with it. So he's a manager at one of the biggest companies in US. He came from a non-IIM background, and he was really struggling with getting a grasp of everything identity. And then there is another person that I know. She's a young mom. She is coming from technology success or technology customers team, and her boss is now pushing her to learn about privileged access management, but she do not have that background. So uh, I spoke to both of them last week, and then I always loved the idea of teaching. I used to teach before getting these jobs, and I felt like let's create a cohort of people who are not from the IAM background. So if you are an IAM expert, probably this cohort is not for you. Probably the podcast would suit you better, or your one-to-one conversations would suit you better. But if you are somebody who is already in IAM domain, but do not have that level of expertise or trying to jump into this IAM domain, this would be a very, very strategic cohort in which I will start from what is a relational database, what is a lightweight directory access protocol. If there is something called as lightweight directory access protocol, that means there would be something called as directory access protocol, because how did lightweight come into the picture? So I will start from that. That will not make you an engineer, but that will make you smart enough to pursue your goals, or deep dive into anything. So I've got good responses so far, David. I will vet out, I will reach out to people and say that now you are too accomplished. Probably you can help, but this might not be the best fit for you. But I'm really hoping to help at least 10 people who are in their identity journey but feel a little lost.
All right. First of all, that's freaking awesome. that is that is amazing. And for those listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, this will be in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, if you check the description, I'll have a link to where you can get in contact with Rohit if you're interested in this. And then if you're listening on Spotify or whatever you listen to, check the show notes. It'll be there. I love every single aspect of how you're approaching this. It's actually conversations I've been having over the last year of, focusing on let's do a better job of educating people on the industry itself, separate of the products, of the vendors, and of everything else. Like, what is this? What is an access certification? What is identity governance? What's the reason behind it? What are you doing? And I'm a big proponent of, you can't understand what something is until you understand, like, why is it there in the first place, right? Like, so every time I talk about IGA, I go all the way back to SOX and Enron and Anderson Consulting, right? Like, why? And they're like, well, what does that have to do with anything? I was like, I'm going to walk you through why, right? Why did this become such a thing? What did that lead to? SOX compliance, which led to audits, which led to governance, which led to trying to figure out how do we take these policies and apply to technical controls, right? And so there's a lot there when you start to kind of understand the history, and it's mostly how I think. I'm always, everything's a puzzle piece, right? So if I understand the bigger picture of a puzzle, then I understand why this piece is important, right? Why does this thing have, this is an edge corner and it's painted red, or why would this be painted red and nothing else is painted red? Oh, when I look at the bigger picture, that's the left edge corner where there's a red spot. Okay, that makes sense now. And it's the same thing with identity. It's how I break things down, and I think it's how it helps. And so I'm a fan of this. I will support. I will send people that I come across that I think, hey, like, this may benefit you. So I'm happy to send them over to you. But this also, a little bit of a spoiler alert. I haven't announced this yet, and I'll do a little bit of a teaser announcement. But this also lines up with some things that I have been planning and wanting to do as well. And so I won't talk about it here in the podcast, but I'll Rohit, I'll hit you up and let you know, and then we'll kind of talk about it. Because I've got some other things planned around there. So it's a little bit of a teaser, folks. A little bit of a teaser. There are some things that I've been thinking about in this kind of educational space. But the biggest thing is, and it's the reason why, like, I started this podcast, and Samir's joined it, and I do the newsletter, is because when I looked at this industry, all of the knowledge was trapped with the vendors or the partners, right? There wasn't like an independent place where you could come and just kind of understand what this stuff is without any kind of biased view coming from there. And listen, and bias doesn't have to be a bad word. Just understand that if a vendor's writing something, like, at the end of the day, they're writing it because they want you to buy their software. Like, it still may be educational. That doesn't mean it's not good. It is, but it's going to come from a biased point of view in that aspect, right? If you talk to an IGA company about what IGA is, well, guess what? All the features that they do are going to be the center of what they think IGA is important, which in some cases may be true, in some cases maybe not, right? You don't get that true kind of perspective. So I think that's awesome, man. This is, I love where the industry is right now, in that we're seeing so many, new faces wanting to come in. We're seeing a younger generation that wants to get and understand about identity. We've got organizations like ID Pro. We've got, more podcasts. We've got, more knowledge sharing about this, which is awesome, right? Because when I started with this thing, it was, probably similar to when you started. Like this is there was nowhere to go to learn this stuff. It was just we just had to pick it up, right? Like by being around a bunch of other smart people that told this stuff, right? And
Yeah.
now we get a chance to share that.
I think, David, you touched on few things which are very important. Uh, One of them is like, a toolbox fallacy. So, say for example, you are trying to, create something like this. Now, you are obviously a creator, so you have those juices flowing, right? But there are few folks who reached out to me over the weekend itself that, hey, I was thinking of something very similar, and would you like to collaborate and whatnot? And I call this something like a toolbox fallacy, in which we are just trying to create that perfect environment before we deep dive into something. Case in point, I have a podcast, right? It is not the most successful podcast out in the world. I don't have a fancy setup like David does. I don't have a condenser mic. I don't have anything. All I have is my iPhone, right? And I sit down on my kitchen table every other Sunday and record it, right? I use a free platform to record. That is why I don't have any guest over, because I don't have a way of inviting any guest, right? And and I am not worried about am I my podcast is being heard by 100 people or 100,000 people, right? That's a byproduct. All I want to do is, in the next 2 years, I would release 100 episodes, right? And the success and failure will take care of itself. So many people are reaching out to me asking me, hey, how do I create a podcast, and what are you doing, and what your setup like? Dude, there is no setup. You have an iPhone, there are free platforms out there. Just release first freaking 5 or 10 episodes. Don't look at
Yeah.
this analytics. It's not going to be an overnight success. I can pretty much tell you, you are not going to make money out of it, right? Unless you are David or Samir, right? So just do
That's-
it for the love of doing it, right? And I made the same mistake when I was trying to learn to code, because I had to have a MacBook Pro, and I needed to have Homebrew installed, and I needed to have everything perfect in order for me to write that first line of code, which was system.out.println hello world, right? So I could have done it on my cell phone for that, all it takes. So
yeah.
so just dive into it. And I agree, right? So many new folks coming into is like, they find hacking very sexy, right? Because the print and visual media have made hacking or ethical
Oh my
hacking
God.
so very
Yeah.
sexy. Now, I don't want to diss on those folks, but like, a red teaming within the company or purple teaming, that's like the most boring job that I could think of, because like, all the vulnerabilities are out there, all the scripts are out there. Most of the time we are just like script kiddies, but that space is sexy, right? And I want to make, like, I cannot do it, but all of us together who are listening to this podcast, we have to make identity sexy, right?
Yeah.
Which other space gives you an ability to work across anything that you are good at? It is relatively safe in terms of, all the bad things that are happening out there in the economy. Not nothing could be 100% safe, but we have to make the space sexy, and for that to happen, we have to open it up for the folks, right? And that is what David and me and everybody hopefully listening would be doing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And listen, completely agree. Don't get it twisted. The fancy setup, the condenser mic, this is all because I love to do this. I don't make a single dime off of this. And I have been doing this now for, I mean, not this particular podcast, but I've been podcasting now for like 6-7 years, right? But but you're right. Like it takes, you got to get out there. Like I tell everybody the same thing. When people ask me, how do you get started? I was like, dude, just use your phone, like get a mic. Like just, I was like,
Yeah.
number one, just start doing it. And then number one, see if you actually like it.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you like it, okay, keep going. Right. And you'll start to change and get all of their stuff once you kind of get, 100 episodes is a good benchmark. I got to keep count across all the different episodes because I started Soul Points podcast way back in the day, Mistaken Identity, me and Mike Kaiser. Then I had my podcast. I produced like 3 other ones. So I'm probably sitting somewhere around 200 some odd episodes of podcasting I've done. And you learn like production scripts or whatever. I have a background in slight audio engineering. Like I was a musician. I was in a studio. So I have equipment because I'm used to it and I know how to use it. And that makes me comfortable. It makes it easy for me to do certain stuff. But yeah, like it's about diving in. And it's that, speaking of like hackers and really engineering mentality of like, you just get started, right? Get started. The first piece of code you do, the first thing you do is always going to suck. That's fine. You slowly get better. You get better. You get better. You get better. And something with this, with content creation or podcasting, it's you put it out there and then you let your audience, when people start picking it up, that'll tell you what you need to talk about or what you need to do next or how you need to go about things. But yeah, it is definitely something that you just dive in and get started. Don't worry about like the result. And I think we've lost that. And I won't preach too much, but like I think in the social media era, we've lost that because we see snapshots of things.
Mhm.
And so, of course, if somebody wants to represent something, they're going to send you a snapshot of the best thing of what it is because it's a picture. You want to try and take the best picture possible. So what you're seeing often is the result of something that happened years and years before, but you're just constantly seeing pictures and pictures and pictures. And so it drives a certain thought process in our head. It's like, oh, it's got to be this, whatever. No, like it's you're seeing the end result. You don't get to see the work, right? You don't, like in movies, we always see like in sports movies or like, training movies, the training montage is always sped up to go over
Yeah.
a minute, right? Like,
Yeah.
because nobody wants to see that, oh, he trained for 9 months, to get ready for this fight. And it was this and this. Nobody wants to see all that, right? So it's just,
Mhm.
oh, let me give you some inspirational music. Let me show you a couple of scenes and we're going to go
Yeah.
through this in 45 seconds. And like, okay, now he's ready for the fight. Okay, like in real life, that was 9 months, right? And there was days where he or she woke up and was like, I don't want to do any of this, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't show those days, but that's what it takes, right? And I think we kind of we lose some of that sometimes, right? And I think it takes people talking about it and reminding us that you just got to get started and keep going. So I love that, man. I'm big fan, man. I am such a big fan of what you're doing. Thank you for doing it. I love seeing this industry and growing, connecting with different people in identity. You're right. We do have to make this sexy, and we do that by talking about it, right? And
Mhm.
so with that, another perfect segue, let's talk about some of the more kind of exciting things or different things that's coming in identity. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on it, right? So looking at where identity is now, either from a technology perspective, like what are you seeing that as kind of getting you excited? Like, man, this is really interesting, and we're going to be seeing some things change with identity.
Absolutely. So I think all of us have heard that identity is the new parameter or identity is the new parameter security. So there is obviously a lot of awareness around this space now, given the fact that both David and I are podcasting on the same thing. So that would mean that identity is getting the recognition that it deserves, right? So uh, with the advent of cloud, uh, AI, or basically, uh, the data that we can now have leverage to create those analytics or to create the analysis based upon that is like really huge and really great, right? So it's a combination of cloud, it's a combination of how we are looking at identity as a domain, and also the amount of data processing capabilities that we have in terms of the huge computing powers, the AI and whatnot. That would really turn the industry, right? So for, say for example, the on-premise identity governance and administration tools that you have right now. Now think about when everything moves to the cloud, would your IGA tool still exist in your premise or on in the data center? Or also when all your workloads are creating within, let's say, AWS, do you need a different tool, or AWS IAM would be sufficient, right? So you have those things to think through. Now if you're using AWS IAM, you have everything in AWS, that's an easier thing to do. But
Right.
it's the transition in between, it's the entropy which is the hard problem to solve, right? How do you go from now to everything in AWS being managed by AWS IAM? So that's one thing that is really interesting to me with the advent of cloud. And also, as we are thinking across the enterprise, every time when a customer or an employee interacts with any of our system, right, all the way up to that that transaction is completed or the employment is finished or terminated or whatever, that life cycle brings in a ton of contextual information that would be used in authentication and authorization space. And that really is exciting to me, because can we at some point of time, just by you logging into a website, not even logging, opening a web page, can I with certainty say this is David because my AI has told me that this is David, right? And that is where we really want to be, just based on the known things like time, the device ID, the device IP,
Yeah.
but also how much pressure did David put on the on his mobile phone, and also is David wearing a cap and things like this, right? Everything that would be true passwordlessness for me, right? And I'm pretty sure that we are going towards that.
Yeah, I think it's this concept of I always butcher this word, ephemeral kind of access, right? Where it's just it's true just in time, right? Like we know who you are, we can authenticate that, and we can authorize you in real time based on as you're interacting with things. And so we just grant you access you need as you move throughout the application. One of the things that, and I talked about this in a previous pod with Alex Bovey over at Conductor One, shout out. There you go. Yep. All the marketing people will love that. But I've talked about this, like the concept of access requests to me, like is one that I'm like, we don't need it. Like that can completely be automated and taken away to where we can just say like, if you have and understand when they've authenticated, and I believe that we can do this right now. You have an authenticated session and I go to access an application. So I know who you are. I know the session you started. I know what application you're trying to access. That's enough information for me to be able to determine, okay, whether or not I should give you access for this, right? And then we can, dive deeper into more of the context that we have about the user. So now we can look at, past behavior, certain things like that. We can look at, if I know enough about David and his organization, so he's an engineer, he's with the other engineers have this. Now we can start adding some rich context in the decision of whether or not we can grant you that access. And at the time you go to access the application, like you don't have an account. Let's say this works better in the cloud for cloud accounts, right? You don't have an account. Like I don't even give you an account. You go to access and go, oh, you don't have an account. That's your request. That's telling me your intent is you want to get access to the application. No, you are, got some information. Let me process, make a decision, come back. I can send it either redirect back to the dashboard or even back to the same application, talk to the application and go, create him an account, give him this access, boom, refresh your page. Now you're in. Now you're logged in. Once you log out, I can go, okay, you've logged out, you've ended that session. You no longer need that access. Like I can do that every single time. Now, granted, yes, there's going to be, we get into the areas of like, if it's real time, what happens at downtime, things like that. But the point is we now have access to this information and we can get it fairly quickly so we can make and move to this decision. So I agree with you. I think I want to see us move to a much more ephemeral place where it's like, it's truly zero standing privilege. It's truly, we're making the decisions at the time, whether or not you should have access to something. Because when I've always said it like this, when you think about it in the real natural analog, everyone to think about it, but in the real world, like we naturally do this all the time, right? Like if somebody comes to your door right now and knocks on your door, right? You are authenticating and authorizing that person multiple times. As you're asking, who is it? You may check your video camera, and then you open the door, you talk to the person. If it's a stranger, you're like, okay, like you've authenticated, you've authorized them enough to open the door and talk to them, but that doesn't mean they can come in the house. Right? Like you're still like, I don't know you. No, you can't come in the house, right? Or am I expecting you? Oh, I was supposed to have a contractor. Okay, now, yes, you can come in. And then it's like, you need to fix your refrigerator. Great. I'm going to walk you over to the refrigerator. No, you can't go in the master bedroom. What do you do? Like, no, right? We do this naturally, like all the time. And I'm like, our systems should interact like more like how we do. So anyway, that's just my little rant.
No,
I go off on it, but yeah.
That's such a great point. I mean, user experience is something that we need to mimic the real life, and companies like Netflix are really bringing the identity game to the next level. So Netflix folks, if you are listening, shout out to you. Like I am watching a movie on iPad at the same time. I just shut it off and I turn on the TV and I can resume the movie within like seconds, and they know who I am. Is it my account or my wife's account and everything? And we need to really start mimicking this in the enterprise identity space as well. So as you said, this context would really help in mimicking this space in real life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, listen, Rohit, man, I could talk to you about this for hours, buddy. I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate you coming out, being on the show, man. This was awesome. We need to, we'll definitely stay in touch on the Identity Navigator stuff with the cohort. For all of you though, that are listening, that are watching, go check out Identity Navigator. It's available all the places where you can get podcasts. I know it's on Spotify because that's where I pick my podcast. I'm not listening to it on there. So at minimum, I know it's on Spotify. Hey, are you, let's make sure we're at some of these conferences. You going to Identiverse this year?
I am not sure yet, but okay. I would let your listeners know.
Yeah, man. Let me know, man, because that definitely, I'd love to hang out, talk more, one of the conferences. But until next time, man, we're going to let you go. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. You guys know what it is, the Identity Jedi Show. We got more great content coming for you. definitely check out the newsletter, theidentityjedi.com. Listen, for those of you listening to this by the time you get this out, we're going to be making some changes. Probably going to be moving to bi-weekly. Listen, people, I just can't keep up. Like, it's just too much content. I'm sorry, but we're probably going to move to bi-weekly. But theidentityjedi.com, you can subscribe to the newsletter. And until the next time, you guys know what it is. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. See you guys next time.